components, as I have just begun to study it, it is very, very much a great change, good or bad, in zoning and many, many other provisions of the government and the roles of community boards and others. Okay, getting then to the question. If your deadline you think will be in June, yes, for city planning to be voting, am I correct on that?
No,
I believe the 60-day clock doesn't end until 60 days from May 8th, which is like the end of the first week in July.
Excuse me. This community board at this point, though, can be changed. It does not plan to have full meetings in July and August. That does not mean, I'm sure, for those of the chairs here and others, and I have some thoughts about how to handle it. Then do you see, roughly speaking, or maybe not roughly, will this legislation ideally and in your schedule be completely passed by the end of the calendar year with every correct step being taken? So
Yes,
December 2024.
Following the timeline, yes, following this timeline, City Council would vote on it prior to the end of 2024. So before the end of 2024, Council would vote on it and it would become law according to this timeline.
Okay.
Yes.
I will only say one other thing and stop, because that what I'm saying would require more discussion from others, and others have their hands up. Just taking the most superficial thing here in Board 7, that at this point that there were no scheduled meetings in July and August for the full board. The board could actually change that. But one thing that I would just put on the table whenever Richard, you are, hold it as a part of the meeting, or Beverly, that after this meeting today or at the end of it, we in this committee should be establishing subgroups in detail, and to be working on those subgroups. This is a massive, massive undertaking, both historically and in terms of New York City now. And I would urge, while we all have our schedules and so on, that we get into smaller groups, work May, June, if need be, in July, in order to be as thorough, as well prepared, and as really as communicative to our constituencies and others as it is possible to be. Lastly, at this moment, you all, with the best of intentions, have not started off that way. It's hard to find the whole schedule. Now we've got, and we are going to work at it, I recommend.
Why don't we hold further discussion on the process? Just let our guests make their presentation. It's going to be lengthy and we're going to have lots of questions. So, and then at the end, we'll decide how we're going to proceed, when we're going to vote, if we're going to vote.
Can I ask one quick one? I know we had a list of questions from last meeting that we were going to relay to DCP before this meeting. Did that happen? And
it was on something different, somewhat different. I mean, what should be?
No, it was about the.
Yeah, we have this, but I think it wasn't enough.
Look at what they're proposing.
It's huge.
It has absolutely nothing to do with what we thought it was.
Exactly.
Okay. With that, let's.
Okay, is it possible to put that screen up also?
It should be.
No.
Max?
Yes.
Max?
Yes.
Button door. This screen on the wall screen.
I can help. I'll be there in a second.
Oh yeah, we know what happened. Hang on.
Can we?
Don't touch it, Richard.
Yeah,
Alex,
yes. We're on the way.
All right. Okay.
Shazam, your screen can.
According to this, it's our job.
What's that?
We're supposed to turn it on. Yeah.
I see. Well, we don't know how yet.
Okay. This is my second.
You did a good job,
Yeah,
actually, Richard. All right.
Let's get started. Just a couple of things, to bear in mind, Chelsea. We are primarily interested in the high density, obviously a high density recommendation. So, if you want to just skim over the low density part, with which we are somewhat familiar.
I've
that would be-
condensed the low density proposals pretty significantly. We can skip right to the medium to high density if you'd like.
Let's
But-
do it. If you condensed it, go ahead and do that.
Okay.
But yeah, and if you can, I know you have decks and everything. If you can go slow.
Okay,
Thanks.
yeah.
Ethel felt that we should also cover the other portions.
Briefly, though, because
Yeah.
this is a huge scope that is more than has happened in 70 years. I think we ought to know what it
It covers
encompasses.
more than.
Yeah, and I think the low density proposals provide context to the changes that are happening citywide, because the idea is that we're building housing in every neighborhood or enabling housing to be built in every neighborhood, and it's not overburdening particular communities. But we'll move quickly through the low density.
Which we do have some.
Okay, go ahead.
It's just.
Are you all seeing that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I
Oh,
just
actually,
wanted to-
Chelsea, I'm so sorry. Before you begin, Alex and I are chatting. We are having some difficulty getting that screen working. I'm Googling some workarounds. So I think what you should do
Okay.
is definitely start the presentation. It's going to be viewable on the screen to most people's left or right. And we're going to kind of work on that in the background while you do that.
Okay, sounds good.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, so I just want to start off by saying thank you for hosting our presentation tonight. It's nice to meet you all. As I mentioned before, I'm the community planner assigned to Community District 7 now. And the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity is, as you mentioned, an ambitious proposal, and it has a lot of components, but we've tailored this presentation to focus on the elements that are most relevant to CD7. And this proposal is just entering public review. So we welcome any questions, comments, feedback at the end of this presentation. We might not have all of the answers for you tonight, but we will definitely follow up via email or in subsequent communication with you all so that we can get you responses to anything that you're unclear on. So the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity is a citywide plan that will encourage incremental housing growth over a wide geography by removing barriers to housing production. And we'll walk through citywide changes and then explain how you can expect the proposal to apply in Community District 7. So just briefly, and I'm sure the committee is aware of this, but we think it's important to underline this before we get into the details of the proposal, and that's that New York City faces a severe housing shortage. The vacancy rate for rental apartments is historically low. It's 1.4%, and that's far below a healthy vacancy rate that would provide New Yorkers with housing options. In Manhattan, the vacancy rate is only 2.3%, and that's down from 10% in 2021. Because our housing demand is greater than our housing supply, New Yorkers are experiencing very high housing costs. So over half of New York City renters are rent burdened, and that means they spend over 30% of their monthly income on rent. And one of the most prominent examples of some of the direct human consequences we see from not having enough homes is homelessness. Each night of 2023, over 92,000 homeless New Yorkers slept in shelters. So the chart you see on the slide here shows housing production over time in New York City. Most of New York City's housing was created in the first half of the 20th century. And since that time, housing production has fallen dramatically. This is in part because zoning has become increasingly restrictive since 1961. And at that same time, demand for housing has increased. So this text amendment is the biggest pro-housing change DCP has ever undertaken, and it would touch the zoning for every single part of the city. We'll start really quickly going over the low density proposals, and then we'll talk in more detail about the medium and high density proposals. And then finally, across the city, there are a range of other citywide proposals, including enabling the conversion of non-residential buildings to housing, allowing more small and shared apartments, and then allowing for infill development on large residential campuses, which we'll talk about later. So first, we'll briefly touch on the changes we're proposing in low density districts. These are primarily in the outer boroughs, and this doesn't apply directly to CB7, but we think that it's important for you all to be aware of it because you're being asked to vote on the entire proposal. Exclusionary zoning rules have made it virtually impossible to build housing in many low density neighborhoods. And this places additional pressure on high density parts of the city to produce more housing. Our first proposal is the town center proposal, and this aims to create more missing middle housing in low density areas. Missing middle housing, or missing middle, refers to a category of housing that's modest in scale and often affordable to middle income residents, a once common type of housing that's not often built in the city anymore. This proposal would streamline zoning rules, including restrictive limits on floor area and height, so that it's once again feasible to build 2 to 4 stories of housing above a commercial ground floor. And you can see on the map where this proposal will apply. Manhattan, it's not extending any of this would only apply in low density areas. The next proposal is transit-oriented development. And transit-oriented development would allow for low-rise buildings, approximately 3 to 5 stories, depending on the underlying zoning, on sites that are near transit and meet specific criteria. And that criteria is outlined on this slide. The next low density proposal is about allowing for accessory dwelling units. So this proposal aims to give homeowners more flexibility, and under this proposal, a 1 or 2 family home would be allowed to add a small accessory dwelling unit, or ADU. These small units would provide housing options for small households. For example, a young person moving into their own place for the first time. And because of their small size, they can serve different income levels as compared to a large single family home, for example. Okay, and now let's move into the medium and high density proposals. So there are 2 key elements to the proposals in medium and high density districts, and the cornerstone is really the universal affordability preference, or UAP. UAP will allow buildings to add at least 20% more housing if the additional homes are permanently affordable housing, and that includes supportive housing. UAP will replace the voluntary inclusionary housing program. And then we're also proposing updates to the mandatory inclusionary housing program, or MIH. So before we begin digging into what the map on this slide is showing, I just want to caveat that this map only shows underlying zoning districts, and we'll discuss special districts in a little more detail later on in the presentation. So this map shows where UAP will apply broadly in the city. This is generally everywhere that the underlying zoning is a medium or high density district, so R6 to R10 districts. UAP is modeled after current rules that allow bigger buildings for affordable senior housing in some neighborhoods. But through the UAP framework, all forms of affordable and supportive housing would be able to take advantage of the higher FARs already provided to affordable senior housing in these districts. Right now, most zoning districts will allow affordable senior housing to be about 20% bigger than other buildings. But there are a few districts that don't have a senior housing preference today. And in those areas where that's not currently the case, housing opportunity would create new FARs to enable the growth of affordable and supportive housing in every neighborhood. The proposal would also make sure that zoning provides room to build the extra affordable housing required through UAP. So there would be limited height increases where it's necessary to make enough room for the affordable homes. And next, I'm going to walk you through how UAP would apply in a couple of different scenarios. So the first is, excuse me, UAP in new construction or mixed income housing. So this is how, let's say a developer has a vacant site in an R6 district and plans to build a mixed income building that includes market rate and affordable units. So the yellow on this drawing that you see just shows the additional floor area a developer can build if they include affordable housing. In reality, the affordable housing would be distributed throughout the building. Today, they would get 3 FAR, regardless of whether they're developing market rate or affordable, and that would allow them to build about 35 units. Under UAP, they'd get 3.9 FAR, but note that extra FAR could only be used for affordable housing. And so if it is, they can build about 10 to 12 more affordable units. And then also under UAP, the building could be about 10 feet taller than it is today. So while 10 to 12 more affordable units doesn't sound like a lot, this is functioning on a citywide scale. So if every project adds a few more affordable units, we can add a significant amount of affordable housing citywide. And then let's look at another example. This is where we have a city-owned site in an R8B district, and it's going to be used for entirely affordable housing in this example. So today, R8B districts do not have a preferential FAR for senior housing. So this site is limited to 47 units, no matter what kind of housing they're providing. We're proposing that R8B districts and then all other districts with no existing senior housing preference or very small senior housing preference receive a 20% bump for affordable housing. So in R8B, this means 4.8 FAR for affordable housing. The building would also be allowed to be 30 feet taller under this scenario. And it is in this example that translates to an additional 9 to 10 permanently affordable homes. So with this proposal, we want to make sure that every medium and high density zoning district has a preference for affordable housing in order to encourage the incremental affordable housing growth throughout the entire city. And we also want to make sure that buildings can actually fit the affordable housing. So we're proposing height increases so the affordable FARs can actually be realized. And that's what this table is showing you. So it shows you the proposed adjustments to both the basic and UAP FARs, and then the height limits to accommodate the additional UAP FAR. And then like the last table, these are the height adjustments that we're proposing for R9 through R12 districts. And just in the interest of time for this presentation, we won't go through these right now, but we provided you with these slides so that you can review them in greater detail. And we're happy to answer any questions about them.
What?
So what was that? Sorry.
Go on.
We're gonna hold our question.
Okay. So I just want to quickly show you all an example of how UAP would impact the built form. On the left, you see a proposed development without UAP. And then on the right, you see that same development with the additional floor area a developer could build if the additional homes were permanently affordable.
Not just to seniors?
Not just for seniors.
Buddy? Yeah, okay, thank you.
So as I mentioned in the proposal overview, UAP would replace voluntary inclusionary housing. And that includes inclusionary housing designated areas and R10 districts and equivalents. Like UAP, those are optional zoning tools to incentivize the creation of affordable housing. And as you can see on the map, VIH, the Voluntary Inclusionary Housing Program, covers a relatively limited part of the city. It's only approximately 13% of medium and high density areas. So UAP would extend a preference for affordable housing citywide to all medium and high density zoning districts. UAP has other benefits compared to VIH, and that includes a lower area median income requirement or AMI requirement. And UAP would also allow for income averaging to provide housing at a wider range of incomes. Right now, we have a more narrow 80% AMI band with VIH. With UAP, it would be 60%. And then, so UAP would be replacing voluntary inclusionary housing, but mandatory inclusionary housing would continue to be mapped, and the existing affordability requirements would remain in place. I keep losing my cursor. There we go. And so now I'm going to discuss the updates to mandatory inclusionary housing. So first, this proposal would allow for MIH option 3 to be a standalone option. MIH option 3 requires that there be a 20% set aside at an average of 40% AMI. This is sometimes called the deep affordability option. Our proposal would also equalize MIH FARs for districts where UAP FAR is higher. So, for example, in an R6A district, the MIH FAR will change from 3.6 to 3.9 to match the UAP FAR. It's important to note, though, that the MIH affordability requirements would remain in place. And then finally, we're proposing to streamline rules for 100% affordable projects. Some projects in Manhattan Community District 7, but also citywide, have a lot of administrative difficulty complying with inclusionary housing requirements. So under this new regime, 100% affordable projects would not be subject to overlapping and conflicting requirements in the zoning. And then briefly returning to our scenarios, I'm going to walk through an example of how this proposal affects a mandatory inclusionary housing area. So let's say there's a site in an R7A district. It was recently rezoned and is subject to MIH. The current maximum MIH FAR is 4.6 FAR, which on this site results in about 54 units. And depending on the MIH area, 20 to 30% of the units would be required to be affordable. Because UAP FAR in R7A districts is 5, the MIH FAR will also be raised to 5, but the 20 to 30% affordability requirement will remain in place. So in this scenario, that would mean approximately 59 total units would be created, 20 to 30% of which would be permanently affordable. And now let's jump into the citywide proposals. So first, this proposal includes the creation of new zoning districts above 12 FAR. The maximum FAR for R11 and R12 districts will be 15 and 18 FAR respectively. And these zoning districts can only be mapped with mandatory inclusionary housing. In addition, this proposal would also create 2 new medium density districts, in R62 and in R6D. And these districts are being proposed, the districts that are being proposed are intended to fill the gap in the existing spectrum of zoning districts. Also, it's important to note that there are no mapping actions as a part of the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity, meaning a separate action would be required to map, for example, an R11 or an R12 if appropriate locations are identified in the future. This proposal would also make it easier to add contextual infill to campuses and other irregular or challenged sites. So previous campus development often took place under tower in the park style regulations called height factor. The proposal would allow height limited infill on sites that would otherwise be forced to develop tall, skinny buildings or nothing at all. And a variety of other changes would address barriers faced by irregular or challenged sites, including making more sites eligible for contextual envelopes and eliminating the outdated sliver law in favor of height limited contextual envelopes. Campuses are defined as sites 1.5 acres or larger, or sites that have full control of the block. In medium and high density areas, the proposal would do 2 things. First, it would replace mixing rules that prevent zoning lots developed with height factor buildings from adding contextual height limited buildings. And second, it would align the distance between buildings rules with the existing multiple dwelling law. The next proposal would remove outdated rules to allow for small and shared apartments. What this means is allowing buildings with only simple, no-frills studios, as well as homes with private bedrooms, but shared kitchens or other common facilities. New small and shared apartments can provide important housing choices for New Yorkers, especially marginally housed New Yorkers, or people who would prefer to live alone but can't afford to do so. So our current zoning doesn't have a clear path for building shared housing. So housing opportunity would create clear rules and make the process less complex to enable a fuller range of shared housing options. These rules would make it possible to build shared housing in any multifamily zoning district. And the proposal would also enable the development of new construction shared housing, including affordable shared housing. In addition to the small and shared housing modifications, we are also proposing some zoning changes to enable more conversions. First, we'll change the eligible geography from business districts in Manhattan and limited areas in Queens and Brooklyn to the entire city. And we'll also allow for the conversion of buildings beyond just large offices, like schools or former religious buildings. We'll also allow more recent buildings to have access to our more flexible reuse regulations. So today, a building must be built prior to 1961 or 1977, depending on what part of the city it's in, to use the more flexible conversion rules. We are proposing to move this cutoff date up to 1990 and allow underused buildings from the 70s and 80s to convert into housing. Our current adaptive reuse regulations only apply when a non-residential building is converting into traditional apartments. But office floor plates, for example, may work better for other kinds of housing like shared housing or dorms. So we're proposing to change our adaptive reuse regulations so that they can be used to convert into any type of housing. And that includes supportive housing, shared housing, or dorms. Okay, our next citywide proposal seeks to expand the existing landmark transfer of development rights program. The landmark TDR program was created in the 1960s to relieve the financial burden on designated landmarks, which are subject to maintenance requirements and are limited in their ability to redevelop or add new buildings to the lot. It would also allow landmarks to transfer development rights to more sites, including other zoning lots on the same zoning block as the landmark or immediately across the street or an intersection from that block. So currently the landmark TDR program is not available for landmarks in historic districts or low density R1 through R5 zoning districts. So this proposal would expand the applicability of the program to those areas. And the expansions of the landmark TDR program, we think would help generate revenue to maintain landmarks while also unlocking additional housing opportunities. And finally, this text amendment, this is the last citywide, and then we'll move into special districts. But this text amendment would eliminate required parking minimums in new buildings citywide. This already does not apply in high density districts, but it's an important piece of the proposal. So these rules already exist in most of Manhattan, but mandated parking is extremely expensive to provide, and parking mandates drive up rents and prevent new housing from being built. So we are proposing to end parking mandates in the city. It's important to note that parking will still be allowed. Projects can add the amount of parking that they believe is appropriate at their location. And then this is the last topic of the evening, special districts. We're going to talk about the special Lincoln Square district. But first, just a quick overview. This map shows you the special districts in the city. New York City has a diverse array of special districts that have been put in place to further neighborhood planning goals. And as a general approach, the current proposal carries through any relevant changes to the special district to ensure that these areas still have appropriate housing opportunities. A lot of special districts were written before there were analogous rules for underlying districts, for example, lot coverage regulations. So the goal is also to just eliminate redundant text in the zoning resolution and align special districts with the broader underlying district rules to create a more consistent framework. And then this is how the proposal will apply in CD7. So we want to align special districts with the UAP framework by replacing inclusionary housing programs with the universal affordability preference. We want to make sure that the FAR increase of 20% for UAP is generally applied across the board within special districts. And that means updating height limits to ensure that the additional FAR can be accommodated everywhere. And then to my earlier point about how many special districts rules were ahead of their time, we're proposing to update some regulations from special districts to underlying zoning districts. And so we're also proposing to eliminate redundant bulk regulations that reference the underlying district. We're eliminating rules that conflict with citywide proposals, for example, the minimum dwelling unit size, and then eliminating bespoke rules for residential conversions to align with the updated citywide regulations. So that being said, here are the proposed changes to the special Lincoln Square district. Like I mentioned before, we want to align special districts with the UAP framework. So that means we would be eliminating the bespoke inclusionary housing provisions to align it with UAP framework. There are new general tower regulations that are part of housing opportunity, and we want to align the special Lincoln Square district with that. So that includes, first we would be maintaining the 30% minimum lot coverage regulation, but it would eliminate the 40% max lot coverage regulation. It adds a bulk packing rule So 60% of the floor area needs to be below 150 feet. And then it would also modify tower top regulations. So more simply put, the regulations for the changes in tower top regulations would just allow for more flexibility to create variation in what tower tops look like. So from our urban designer's perspective, allowing for greater variation in tower tops creates more variation in the skyline and the way that buildings look. And then finally, we would just be aligning some of the redundant text, the street wall recesses and permanent obstructions with the new underlying regulations. So that concludes the proposal portion of the presentation. We can jump into questions. Here is the timeline that Veronica was speaking to earlier.
It's Max. Just to think about the organization of how we're going to work through the questions. We have a list of people that have signed up online. There probably are some people in the room as well, but there is one other one that's kind of been sent another way. Does everyone mind if I maybe just read that one first, and then we can kind of work through the long lists?
I didn't quite get that. What did you say, Matt?
I have one question on the side here that I've gotten from someone. Can we read that one first before we then either do the in-person hands or the online people from Zoom?
I suppose I don't know why.
Okay, you just be organizationally, it would be helpful on our end.
All
I'm just going to go ahead and read it. Quote, how do we ensure that those also quote permanently affordable unquote units UAP remain financially solvent in the future, given operational costs, including property tax increase at rates faster than AMI? Question mark. I would hate to see us building housing that quickly becomes defunded or unmaintained because we didn't think about the long-term economics. Perhaps that's more of a statement than a question. Thanks.
Thanks. I think there was a question about sort of how, like, the economics of these buildings, which I can quickly speak to. So we're really pleased that the state has passed 45X, which is a tax incentive for income restricted affordable housing. Many of you may be familiar with the previous tax incentive, 421A. 45X would incentivize developers to, they would provide them with a tax incentive to provide 20% of their floor, 20% of the building to be permanently affordable income restricted housing. 45X is affordability requirement is 80% MI. So we're pleased that UAP has a deeper affordability level than 45X, meaning that our proposal actually improves upon the state's tax incentive, but they also complement one another. So if someone is using UAP to build a building with, about 20% more units, they'll also be using 45X likely if it's a private developer, and so they'll be receiving that tax incentive from the state. So we think these really work together to make these buildings make sense. If the state hadn't passed a tax incentive, we probably wouldn't see that kind of private interest in developing rental housing. But because they have, we expect that people will use this, and it will, create financially solvent buildings.
Thanks. That's sufficient.
All right. I think we should take questions from the committee first, and then from people online. Only because it's likely that the committee's questions will answer some of the questions of other people. So I'm just going to arbitrarily start down here. If anyone, just raise your hand if you have a question. Paige.
This is a hell of a lot of information to take in. And my position is, I'm a building restorer. I try to keep neighborhoods, buildings, parks, healthy, yet keeping them occupied. I didn't hear anything about the designated properties. The west side where we live is covered with amazing 4-story brownstones and 5- and 6-story old tenements that have been very lovingly turned back to really sensible housing. I didn't hear anything about any protections for because the problem is to keep everybody even and the city growing. I'm afraid, and I hope you guys have taken it into consideration, that as a result, developers and even private owners, brownstones or whatever, will find a way to demolish their existing building so they can keep up with the new zoning regulations. This happens, and sometimes we can catch them. We all know that. I've been here, I think, for what, 7, 8 years, and every now and then there's a ripple of tear downs. I don't see anything that gives preservation or existing unusual buildings that are not designated protection going forward. This is basically apple picking season, is what I see, to get a bigger apple. Have you thought of those issues that will probably keep me up at night so I can call you?
Yes, certainly we've thought of those issues. So first off, I think maybe part of the question was about areas that were designated historic districts, and then also part of your question is obviously about areas outside of that. So I'll start by just clarifying that, like, LPC procedures, the landmarks procedures remain in place. So, you know, for anything that's in a historic district, et cetera, we'll still have to go through those processes at LPC. That procedure is, you know, firm and tight, and it will remain in place. For sort of, I think the other part of that question was more general about like redevelopment and spurting demolitions and reconstruction of buildings or construction of larger buildings. These are incremental changes. In most cases, the market rate FARs are remaining constant, and you're just receiving a bump for affordable housing. And so that is not a change such that it would incentivize someone to build if they weren't incentivized today, because their market rate FAR isn't really increasing. And so they're not getting much more than they could build today. So we don't think this is the type of action that would really, you know, spur sudden tear downs like you might see in a neighborhood rezoning, in which the increases in density are much higher. But if someone is already going to redevelop that lot, they would be able to include a little bit more housing, so that, you know, that you could take advantage of that UAP bump, for example. We have, of course, done a thorough environmental impact statement, which I think, you know, addresses a lot of these specific concerns that you've found, that you've highlighted. So we can maybe dig in more on that later or in a subsequent presentation.
Okay, I have 2 questions. The first one is R11, R11A, and R12. What would, you did not have a basic FAR on that? It goes up to 15. Does that 15 include the 20% bump, or would the bump be on top of the 15 FAR?
Great question. R11s and R12s would have to be mapped with mandatory inclusionary housing. So what that means is that the maximum is that 15 or 18, but because it has to use one of the MIH options, within that 15 or 18, 20 to 30% of that has to be permanently affordable under MIH. So UAP wouldn't apply to R11 and R12 because they have to be participating in MIH when they're mapped. And so because they have to participate in this mandatory program, they therefore are not eligible for this voluntary program, UAP. UAP and MIH are geographically exclusive. And so those R11s and R12s have to participate in MIH. MIH will be mapped alongside them when they are mapped, if and when they're mapped in the future.
Would the affordable housing be required to be on site?
Yes, in this through UAP, we're preserving a limited offsite opportunity for where it already exists, which will sunset. But the bump is for the floor area. It's just a zoning framework, and so you cannot, you know, outside of those limited VIH areas that are already eligible for offsite. UAP, you would only take advantage of it if you're providing the floor area on site, because you just get the eligible bump if you provide that floor area in the building. That's all you're getting there is the preferential space that can be filled with only permanently affordable units.
Yeah.
TDR. How how would you define the expansion of the area that would be affected? Hello?
Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure I followed the question. The expansion, is it about landmark TDR specifically?
Okay, when you say proposed, I mean, before it was across the street or adjacent.
Yeah.
Now it is going over to 2 blocks, 3 blocks. What, this is a very irregular site that you're showing on the proposed. What
Yeah.
is the regulations underlying that?
Yeah, so it's this first bullet under Chelsea's first point. Anything that is on the same zoning block as the landmark, so see that landmark that's in the hotter pink color, anything on that same zoning block is eligible for TDR, and anything that is across the street or an intersection from that landmark zoning block is also eligible for the TDR. So that's how you're getting the stuff that's not on the zoning block. It's directly across the street or directly across an intersection in the cases of the ones that's like catty corner from the block.
So even if you have a through block, you go then 2 blocks away.
I'm not sure I understand the hypothetical. So sorry, do you mind, this is a through block, meaning like if this
Through block.
the block if the lot or the block was I'm not sure about the term through block. A through lot really wouldn't affect this
I
because
said through block.
oh sorry, I'm sorry, I thought I heard through block, apologies. So a through lot wouldn't necessarily affect your transfer possibilities because you would still be allowed. The transfer is now based on the block, not on the lot. It's anything that's on your same zoning block or across the street or an intersection. So let's imagine that landmark extends up sort of through that lot that's right above it, so it becomes a through lot. It could then, it would have the same universe of eligible sites, receiving sites. Thanks. Sorry, I misheard. It's a little bit hard to hear in the room, but I'll correct me if I missed anything, please.
For all of these affordable housing proposals, are any requirement for distribution within the building?
Yes, in UAP, they'll be subject to the same distribution requirements that MIH are subject to, which requires a distribution among the buildings, or sorry, within the buildings.
You can't lump them on one floor.
Exactly.
Shelley. Okay, along with that, besides the distribution, what about the quality of apartment?
The size of the apartment is also subject to the same rules. Like you can't have all of your affordable apartments be studios and all of your market rate apartments be 3 bedrooms or anything like that. HPD has existing rules for all those concerns, I think, about sort of like quality and finishes of the apartments, and for MIH, and those will apply for UAP as well.
Okay, along with that, not just size of the apartment, but is there any stipulation that if 20% of the building must be affordable, that is 20% of the square footage of residential?
Yeah, it's UAP is the floor area. It's 20% of the floor area of the building. At least, they get at least 20% floor area increase. So it's based on floor area. Because of the unit distribution requirements, that 20% is also reflected in the units, but it's a floor area provision. It's about the FAR.
Okay, and you may have answered this, but where is the guarantee going to be of permanent affordability for the affordable apartments?
Great question.
We know what.
Yeah, I think people have, had perhaps concerns about permanent affordability as it was defined in previous tax incentives and things like that. But we're very pleased that UAP will have permanent affordability enforced through a deed restriction. So as long as the building exists on the lot, there'll be, a deed restriction, which that building, if it was to, stop providing affordable housing, it would not be in compliance with the deed restriction. So it travels along the lifetime of the building with the deed restriction.
Perfect.
No problem.
I have many questions, but I'll only ask 3 or 4, and then come back to my original proposal that when we are finished with this, that we set up a schedule and a way, a methodology in which this committee organizes itself into 2 or 3 or 4 subgroups with particular. Okay, I know that's happened, but I want to reiterate, but it's the only way we can do it. Okay, so I have 2 or 3. One, please, is at this in this period of time, and I think in the past, an organization like the Empire State Development Corporation, in its proposals, could override zoning law or change it. Would that continue under this particular proposal? Because there have been many projects in which that's occurred and may not be contextual or even affordable. Will that particular stipulation occur for ESD to override the zoning?
Yeah, that's within their legal authority outside of zoning. So since this only changes the zoning, it doesn't change like other agencies' legal authority. So that would continue to exist. I think if you have like specific questions about that, we may have to get back to you because that's a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, ESD's authority. But this proposal wouldn't change that.
But just a particular specific example. Could in Board 7, for example, there are a number of NYCHA housing developments, and excuse me, some of them are R7, 8, and so on. But when I was reading some of this, some either WAG or smart person, I don't know, said this is an opportunity to build above the housing authority buildings because we could go up higher, so or in a variety of ways, so that the NYCHA would not only become taller and perhaps for affordable, but would it be correct? Would it be only for senior housing? And remember that much in NYCHA housing, including from Regional Plan and others, have proposed here that housing and stores and so on take over where parking is and where the green is. So we can be perhaps envisioning a very great attempt at maybe good housing and maybe a lot of boondoggles.
Yeah, great questions about NYCHA housing. I think some people, have maybe submitted like provocative examples of how you could revitalize NYCHA, which maybe included building higher, but that's not really what this proposal is about. This proposal is about extending what NYCHA wants for infill is the ability to do height limited infill, to use our existing contextual zoning rules to do height limited infill on the lot. Because they are tall, built under height factor zoning, they can't do height limited infill because they're out of compliance with the height limits. The building's already there, it's not getting any taller. The issue is they can't add the height limited buildings because they have the tall buildings. And that's the obstacle that this zoning seeks to address, the zoning change seeks to address. There obviously, NYCHA has important open space and, parking needs. This does maintain a 50% lot coverage maximum for campuses. And so we do think that will, continue to preserve those open space opportunities. And also NYCHA would have to seek a authorization from the City Planning Commission to remove existing parking, as would anyone removing previously required existing parking. They would need to seek an authorization. They can't remove the parking.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Seema?
So, the state recently lifted the 12 FAR max. How does that, I don't understand exactly how that interacts with all the zoning changes you're proposing here. Can you talk to that, please?
Sure. So if there was a 12 FAR cap, we couldn't create zoning districts that had, a residential FARs above 12, or I suppose maybe we could have created them but never used them. So, you couldn't have had a zoning district that allowed for above 12 FAR. That was what the state's cap was. But now we can. we could create that tool, a zoning district that has an FAR, residential FAR above 12. And so as Chelsea outlined, we're creating these R11 and R12 districts that have 15 and 18 residential FAR. We're not mapping them today, but the state's legislation has, the state's changes have enabled us to create that tool that we may use in the future if there are appropriate locations for in excess of 12 residential FAR. 15 or 18
you're
FAR
saying
by these districts.
That's helpful. So you're saying that if for some reason here in CD7, we wanted to do that, that would be a rezoning process.
Exactly. That would have to go through ULURP and everything. If
Right.
anywhere these R11 and R12 districts, or for that matter, the new R6 districts were to be mapped, they would have to go through a full separate zoning map action. They're not being mapped today. They're just new tools that we could use in the future, but again, have to go through ULURP.
Got it. Thank you.
No worries.
Two questions. As somebody asked this the last month, and I don't know if we got the answer, but I didn't hear tonight. What's the rationale for the new 1990 baseline for the commercial to residential conversions as opposed to the prior earlier build dates? Where does 1990 come from?
Yeah, so this comes from the lifetime of commercial office space, but we do think it's that this has a certain lease period in which at a certain time it becomes outdated, and so we think we do want to open up opportunities for more recent non-residential buildings to convert to housing. There are, for example, and there are buildings that have converted in Lower Manhattan that were built in the early 1970s. There are similar buildings that were built in the early 1970s in Midtown Manhattan that want to convert, but they can't because they don't have access to that 1977 zoning rule. And we think 1990 strikes the balance of allowing those buildings to convert. There's more residential buildings, but also preserves our important commercial office space stock. It's an important resource for New York City for economic reasons. So we're not going to say that any non-residential building can convert, something that was built yesterday, for example. That would also obviously create sort of a one-step, two-step problem in which someone could create a building and then immediately convert it. So it's important to have a cutoff date, but one that is sufficiently flexible to allow commercial spaces that have reached the end of their useful lifetime to convert.
Okay, my other question, actually related to a slide that was just on here, but you just took it off to move to this slide. But it refers to the outdated sliver law. I do not understand why the sliver law is outdated. And
Great question.
And I'm not clear what you are exactly how it would be changed under your proposals here. All right, good. And what is it?
Yeah, this is a great question. Well, I'll start with what is it, so we're all on the same page there. So the sliver law dates to the 1980s, and it imposes height limits on narrow lots that are less than 45 feet. 45 feet. Apologies, less than 45 feet. And so the sliver law was created before height limits existed in our zoning, and before contextual districts were a thing where they, set a clear height limit. Today, all districts either include height limits in contextual districts or the option to use a height limited option, if you're using quality housing regulations in a non-contextual district. And so these proposals would allow those height limits, which we think is, a more rational system consistent with all the, height limit regulations for other types of sites that are, wider than 45 feet, to control the building's maximum height. Sliver law was, zoning as an iterative process, and sliver law was an attempt at controlling the maximum heights of buildings. We think height limits of contextual envelopes work better. They work throughout the city, everywhere else. And so, so that's the rationale there and what the change is.
Did you just say that all districts contain height limits?
So contextual districts contain, you have to follow height limits. And then if you're in a non-contextual district, they allow a height limited option. So all districts have the option to pursue height limited infill, height limited buildings. Eliminating sliver law wouldn't mean that someone could build to a height factor building on a sliver lot. It would just mean that they would have the option to use the contextual rules to do a height limited building. So they would have to follow that contextual height limit for their district.
It's optional.
No, they wouldn't be if they wouldn't be able to develop a like infinitely tall, but like an open space ratio height factor building that is taller than the height limit of the district. They would have to follow the height limit that's in the contextual regulations.
If it's in a contextual district.
No, they would have to follow the quality housing rules that set out height limits. That is the quality housing option in the non-contextual district.
Whoa,
If they don't avail themselves of that option, is there anything limiting the height of a building which would be covered now by the sliver law?
I believe the sliver law would continue to apply if other height limits, like if they weren't doing the option, they wouldn't have another option, like they would still be constrained by the sliver law. But let's confirm that with you. Follow up.
The slides.
The slide says eliminate the sliver law, so that's.
Only your contextual info.
So,
That's actually.
all right, we'll get back to us on that. I don't want to hold you up now.
well, the question is the sliver law going to remain in height?
For non-contextual district.
Right.
In non-contextual districts.
We could just switch.
Yeah, let me get back to you about that one, because my understanding is that if there other height limits were for some reason not to apply in the non-contextual district, that the sliver law would still constrain that development. But let me confirm that specific rule with you, the sliver law applicability in non-contextual districts.
Yeah, sure. So I was saying, I'm excited to see a lot of this proposal that we can actually get more housing in our district. It's very exciting, especially UAP. But I wanted to actually ask more about the campuses. And did you guys do any research into where this would apply in CB7 specifically? I'm just curious, like where our opportunities are, where we could potentially build more here specifically. And if you don't know now, you can get back to us on that.
I can get back to you all on that about specific sites. The rules are that it has to be sites that, like the slide says, 1.5 acres or larger, or sites that are having full block control. But I can get back to you about what sites this would be applicable to in CD7.
Okay, my other question was on the shared and SRO housing opportunities. Would these be, I think now there's some limited opportunity to build this and build it as affordable housing. Would this now allow market rate SROs and shared housing opportunities, or would it still just be affordable?
Yeah, so this creates a zoning pathway. It removes some limited zoning obstacles to creating shared housing, which whether it's market rate or affordable. But the real obstacles to building shared housing are actually today not in zoning. They're in the housing maintenance code. And so HPD is working on a clear roadmap about with proposed changes to the housing maintenance code that would allow for shared housing. It would include various controls on, when it could be created. So in short, this, removes the zoning obstacles for all forms of support for shared housing in the neatest way to answer your question. But I think if you need more detailed answers about the, non-zoning pathways for creating market rate or affordable shared housing, we can have HPD speak to that.
So it sounds like there'd be a local law change required to.
There would need to be changes to the housing maintenance code, yes, to make this actually happen. This just gets the zoning obstacles out of the way, but yeah, housing maintenance code changes would really be critical there. And that's
Clarification.
Yeah, so I'm a follow-up on that, and I am not an expert in any of this, but I would think that the multiple dwelling law, the state multiple dwelling law, would also have some relevance to these issues of the shared housing things. This proposal doesn't change the multiple dwelling law, but can you speak at all to, or is that negative? Can you speak at all to whatever the restrictions or impacts, if any, of the multiple dwelling law as it relates to these shared housing things?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to get back to you with an answer from HPD on that, since they're really examining the non-zoning obstacles to shared housing, since they're leading that work. We'll get back to you with an answer from HPD. That multiple dwelling law interactions with the shared housing.
Can I ask you about the special districts? Because that actually may be the most important thing that we're doing around here this year. Are there any height restrictions with respect to special districts that will remain if this is.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Are there any height restrictions currently in effect for special districts which would not be eliminated by this proposed amendment?
So are you speaking specifically about the special Lincoln Square district or
Yeah.
more
Yeah,
generally?
Well, let's talk about Lincoln Square.
Yeah, Lincoln Square, the only changes that are happening are what you see on the slide. And so we're not allowing towers to go higher than they than they can now. We're modifying some of the bulk packing rules, so like where the floor area can be located, and then some of the lot coverage, and then like tower top regulations, which would allow for like a little more variation of what buildings look like at the top. But we're not like allowing for increases in height. Veronica, you can correct me if I'm wrong about that.
But a developer in that district would be able to take advantage of UAP.
Yeah, my
And-
understanding, yeah,
and
they would be able to follow UAP height limits that we're proposing to align those for sort of the things that aren't following the tower rules where they're building a building. They would follow the height limits that are set out in UAP. So
More questions?
we're not
Yes,
eliminating the
sure.
height limits, though. I guess we're just aligning them with universal affordability preference.
This is a NYCHA question. There's a fact with Douglas houses, which has about 4,000 residents, that the population's aging. And many of the people living there live in 2 to 3 bedroom apartments where they raise their family. And very often they move to other developments out of the neighborhoods they're used to be eventually when they come to that conclusion that it's inappropriate. So I proposed something. I'm on the Age-Friendly Commission, New York City, which the de Blasio administration did a pilot on, and that was to build senior supportive housing, okay, on NYCHA land with overwhelming priority given to seniors who live in that development. And 3 were done, including one by one of our local senior Westside Federation Senior Supportive Housing in the Bronx. There was one in the Bronx, one in Brooklyn, Queens, and all 3 were very successful. But nothing was ever done with it. Now, how could, since senior housing is so, low-income senior housing is so important in this plan, could that help accommodate, if the space is available, for something like this in existing NYCHA developments, where this would be helpful to everybody, more family housing would become available and more appropriate senior housing.
Yeah, that's a great question. Sorry,
This
was someone else going to
was done
answer?
at a couple of our houses under a different scheme, which I worked on, but we took parking lots to do it.
Okay,
And we kept people in their communities.
okay, so let's see.
Yeah, thanks. And so I obviously can't speak to, NYCHA's sort of like policies and future plans, but we're working very closely with them, so they're aware of the allowances that this will make for them for campus infill. In the past, a lot of NYCHA's campus infill, what has happened, has been 100%, as you know, senior affordable housing, and so there's definitely interest from NYCHA in doing things like that again, I think, and we are working closely so that they're aware of their possibilities in the zoning. They do also have the pathway of mayoral zoning overrides for infill, but that is a lot of process and time intensive for NYCHA. So we're creating a pathway, as of right for campuses to create infill. And so, and as just as someone brought up the parking question, just to flag again, if that parking was previously required then NYCHA would have to seek the authorization to remove it. And then there's still the proposed 50% lot coverage maximum, but we do think this will open up opportunities for NYCHA to pursue things like senior affordable housing or, you know, other infill opportunities that they see appropriate as they articulate in their sort of policy priorities.
Thank you. Thanks. Yes,
I was just gonna say, you went by one little comment about 100 miles an hour, which applies to NYCHA camp, which is the mayoral overrides.
The mayoral
overrides.
But it's really, really helpful when you're doing those projects.
Mm-hmm. And that remains, you know, a tool that NYCHA has. That's, you know, sorry if I was speaking too fast, but I also, you know, mayoral zoning overrides are, you know, not like that's a process that's not affected by this proposal. But that will remain in place for NYCHA, and it is how most of their development has taken place. Most
really
of their
helps. Really helps when you're working on NYCHA.
Mm-hmm.
I think now, if bear with us, we're going to take some questions from people who are online
and here.
and here.
May we
let's
start with the two
online.
board members that are online first, actually, since you said we're doing board members first. I think I saw Jamie's hand followed by Michael's.
Actually, my
Okay,
question,
Jami.
hi, everyone. My question was asked asked by Seema and answered thoroughly by the presenters, but I will take the occasion to thank you both so much for coming, meeting with us and giving us such a thorough presentation. We greatly appreciate it. And I'll turn it back to the committee. Thank you.
Michael.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Just a quick clarifying question. One of the early slides in the presentation here just shared like part of the impetus for this change as the like the amount of vacancies, apartment vacancies in the city. I think it was somewhere around like 1 to 2%. Are you able to share like how that number was arrived at? Like, is that looking at the total number of units that are on the market, or is there some sort of like occupancy requirement?
Sure, great question. That vacancy rate, which citywide is 1.4% in 2023, and in Manhattan was 2.33%, is from HPD's Housing and Vacancy Survey, which is uses a methodology of analyzing census data. As many of you may know, in order to maintain like rent stabilization, we have to have be in a rent emergency. New York City is in, which is defined as a vacancy rate of less than 5%, and that requires to know if we're in that or not, HPD every 3 years has to conduct the Housing and Vacancy Survey, which is how many units are vacant and available to rent. And so that number is historically low, 1.4%. It's even lower for rent regulated units. So that's if you have any follow-ups about that, I'm happy to either answer them now or direct you to the Housing and Vacancy Survey initial findings online, which have more detailed methodological information.
I think that's sufficient. Thank you.
Thanks.
Richard, we have a whole list of people that signed up if you want us to go to that, but I think many of them are must be there in person. I can go through that list, or you can just call hands and then I can consult the list, whoever's left over, however you want to do it.
All right, well, let's see how many people who are here have comments or questions. All right, I'm going to start arbitrarily in the front row, and my left to my right.
And go by the column.
Yes, right. Yes.
Want to bring them forward?
Comments, is that okay?
Yes.
Richard,
You gotta stand there where they.
can you come
Or
forward?
if you just stand up and keep your voice
On the,
yeah.
The new microphone
Okay,
should
hi,
pick it up from everywhere in the room. The one thing I'd say is if you could just announce your name first, and then I can kind of cross you off this list rather. And go ahead.
Hi, I'm Benjamin Radensky. I live around the corner on 85th Street in West End. I grew up here. I went to so I'm in strong support of this proposal. I don't think it really goes far enough. I also think the Upper West Side has been doing a lot in terms of even on 84th Street and Broadway. They just knocked down a building, knocked down several buildings, and now they're going to build a bunch more, which is great. But the outer boroughs and a lot of the areas which have transit don't seem to be densifying at the same degree, and this proposal doesn't seem to be doing enough to make them do that either, or allow them to do that if they wanted to. I think that also our zoning law, and this does not really address it, currently incentivizes kind of like suburban style towers in the park developments. I don't think that that's really healthy for cities personally. And then the other thing is, I think that this zoning proposal doesn't kind of like encourage is, or it doesn't allow, and it's banned in most of the 5 boroughs, is basically brownstones or townhouses are not allowed in town, which I think is insane. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done. I really want to, raise my kids here. I grew up here. I want my parents to help raise my kids. I want them to be near me. So that's why I feel very strongly about this. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Just let's we can talk about who had his hand up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say that I'm very supportive of this proposal, and I'm looking forward to seeing it advantage.
Thank you.
My name is Nick Spensky. I live in the neighborhood. I'm lucky to live in the same neighborhood. It's a really beautiful neighborhood. I moved the last time within the neighborhood several years ago, and I think that experience, I want to emphasize how challenging it is to find a place in the neighborhood. We were working with someone who was showing us units, and they like within the same day the showing would be canceled because so it was incredibly difficult to find a place. I feel lucky that we found one. I live with my wife. We're both lucky to work. We make comfortably above area median income, and still our rent is very burdensome for us. I echo that. It's a beautiful neighborhood. I would love to raise a family here. It's very challenging to find an affordable place to live. I live up to my street. There's no space between buildings. Most of them are over 10 FAR or even higher than that. Most of it you couldn't build today. Almost none of them have any parking. Couldn't build that today. So, I live in a really old building. It's not very big, and even so, it's very expensive, and even that is impossible to build today. But then when we talk about how we got here, we look at these laws that have been in place. The zoning code has been in place for a really long time. I think I know this statement, maybe we're not going far enough, sounds a little strong, but I believe that the magnitude of this problem is very severe. There's been an underinvestment in housing in the city for a very long time, and so I support any effort to build more and make more homeless.
Thank you. More people to call home. Thank you. Second row. Either way. We're going this way? Yeah. Go ahead. Okay. Yeah.
So,
Yes, congratulations.
thank you. There's Jonathan. I lived in this neighborhood, born and raised, and I grew up in the Mitchneck on Tibita Street. My dad has been there for 45 plus years. So this is all I know is college. And I had the opportunity to graduate college for most degrees, but part of them is because I grew up in the state neighborhood and I had access to school, the opportunities, the amenities that I was able to learn that what it means to be a successful person and the access to housing. We've done very little. The neighborhood below statewide average in terms of housing, but over half the units that we have though are all below 62nd Street. I should know, I've lost all of that built up. I was born while someplace, the Floyd place was being built, and I know that I got out of my way to sit in West Riverside Center, what it was formerly known as one of my square dollars. And I also know that we've also lost thousands of homes, mergers, and that's helping the neighborhood unaffordable teachers, essential workers, new families, and it was stress. I know friends who are saying that things out. They won't be. I know whatever offer I get, I won't be already. I've done a little bit of work with people apartments, and it's not much room. I know I can't afford it. So your guess is to start. I mean, I also echo that we could do way more, but the universal affordability preference, and especially the parking minimum, and I'm very excited about high density districts. I have a few ideas of where that could go, like the new science center on West End Avenue, which is quite literally right outside my movement. But I support the plan because I want people to have access to the things that I was able to grow up with, the access to schools, being in the Lincoln Center, the great parks,
great neighborhood, a great safe neighborhood with great transit. I also echo that maybe 10, 20 years down the line, I want to raise a family here, and I know my mother would be very glad if I grew up in the same neighborhood, so I would urge everyone to support City of Yes.
It's good to know the connections are still going on. Next, along that line.
Hi, my grandchildren are fifth generation New Yorkers. My name is MCB7. I mean, some of this sounds great. Problem being, the middle class is dwindling in Manhattan. It's barely left. We are from the Mitchell buildings. They always have parking. And even with the parking and families, many families need a car to get out of the city, into the city, et cetera, or else we're stranded because of the lack of infrastructure, public transportation infrastructure. We all use subways and buses and like bike to work for 30 years in Harlem. So in our Mitchell buildings years ago in the 70s when we got a unit and we were so excited, we had to go on a waiting list to get a car, and it took 10 years. So the idea that you don't have to build any garage space becomes problematic with whole neighborhoods because we've been deprived of so much street space to park, and our garages are over $700. And you're going to cause a problem again for a middle class. I'm talking families. 18% of our families have children under 18. Only 18%. As soon as those children are older, Sheldon said, they can't afford to live. So every time I hear things, the family is not taken into consideration. And that unit is very important to the health of Manhattan. I think it's wonderful that people come from outside the city to make their careers. I've met them. But as soon as it comes time to have a family, most of them leave. And as I said, I don't want to drive in New York, my car. But it becomes a necessity because the United States, as you know, is way down there as far as public transportation infrastructure. And we need light rail on all our tunnels and highways. So the idea that we're going to make a community like my friend lives in Brooklyn, where they built luxury high rises. She lives now in a retirement community in Florida. And she has a brownstone in Brooklyn from years ago and another building. And he can't park anymore because the new buildings that have come up have restricted parking because you can't tell somebody who's buying a luxury unit can't have a car. And they're going to be
This proposal doesn't change parking rules for the Upper West Side. It's already optional, and it will remain optional.
Oh, is that what happened on 103rd Street when they built the luxury housing, no affordable housing?
Whatever it is, it's not parking on the Upper West Side.
Yeah, the changes. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I couldn't tell if that was a question addressed to me. You're asking me to confirm that there aren't changes to the Manhattan core, minimums or maximums. In the Manhattan core, parking is already optional and it will remain optional. And there aren't changes to maximums under this proposal. In fact, the very minimal changes to parking regulations are all sort of about making it clearer about how you provide parking, but there's no changes to how much could be provided. To talk a little bit about the parking proposal overall, we are making parking optional in other parts of the city where it's not optional today. but parking will still be allowed. And we anticipate that in areas where they're providing parking now, and as well as in Manhattan, developers are making that choice not based on parking regulations, obviously in Manhattan, because there is no minimum. They're not making the decision based on zoning, they're making it based on the market. And we believe they'll continue to make similar decisions to provide parking for what the market demands. We obviously understand that parking and car access is a critical need for families and the New Yorkers. So we don't want to make life untenable for anyone, but at the same time, as I think we've heard from a few people just now, raising a family in New York, the main obstacle is the affordability crisis, and to eliminate a potential cost increase to housing by making parking optional in more places where it's not needed is going to help to combat high housing costs. But just to clarify the most specific question, Manhattan core regulations are not really changing besides in extremely minute ways, but minimums and maximums not changing.
Yes, next. Yeah.
Hi, so my name is Melanie. I am a resident of the Upper West Side. I have a couple of questions for the DCP rep, actually. I wanted to, even though it's not really applicable so much to the Upper West Side, I do have interests outside of the Upper West Side. So I'm curious to hear you speak briefly about how the ADU housing, how would communities stop a neighbor, let's say, from building a bunch of sheds in their backyard, suddenly, having triple the number of residents in that house, filling basements to capacity, inevitably destroying the quality of life for that community and the property values for those homes. So that's my first question. And then I have a question more applicable to the Upper West Side.
Why don't we answer your first question?
Back to the second. More applicable.
You have my word.
Thank you.
You want to?
Okay. Yeah. So the accessory dwelling unit proposal, I just want to clarify. Only one accessory dwelling unit would be allowed per 1 or 2 family building. That accessory dwelling unit would be size limited. There we go. Here, I'll bring it back up the slide. Would be size limited to 800 square feet. There are, of course, other regulations that dictate, the overcrowding conditions, things like that, housing maintenance code, building code, that all set life and safety measures in place to make sure that buildings are safe, and all of those will apply to accessory dwelling units. We've actually convened an interagency working group that's focused specifically on ADUs, and part of it's focused specifically on basement ADUs to make sure that those units are safe for tenants. We understand that there are many illegal, informal basement ADUs today that are unsafe. Part of the reason that they're unsafe is those tenants have, no legal protections because they're existing in the shadows. Bringing, a legal housing option online can help to make sure that people have access to this, safe and important housing option in the low density areas where today maybe they're overcrowding into a single family home because there aren't options in the low density areas for people who can't afford a single family home. This opens up a pathway for those. But I don't want to, minimize the legitimate safety concerns that are arisen, particularly to ADUs, particularly things like stormwater flooding. And that's why we have this interagency working group convened by the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, as well as City Hall and DCP, which will set out clear regulations, including some that are specific to stormwater flood areas. Those are in development by the working group right now to make sure that those units are safe.
Second question.
Just to follow up on that, I think the stormwater flooding, especially having seen what happened after Sandy, I think you can oversee what you want, but when you have people with 30 people in their basement illegally, I just think it's inviting a lot of problems and
This proposal does not allow people to occupy space illegally.
I understand that, but
It's an enforcement issue, not the zoning.
I'm fully aware of that. My concern is a lack of enforcement. I guess that's the question. How is that going to be enforced? And when you have all these new basement dwellings, are you increasing the number of inspectors? I mean, that's a question. But on to my second part, more locally in the Upper West Side, has there been a discussion or plans to use this particular style of housing, the SROs and the shared housing? I'm curious if there are plans to use this particular style of housing specifically for the 180,000 new migrants who have arrived in New York City, who are in dire need of homes. So I'm not saying that it's not a good solution for them, or, I mean, I guess that's what I am saying, but I'm just wondering if this is a back-ended way to house our migrant crisis. And so I'm curious if during any of these official meetings, if that's been discussed. So.
Yeah, so first I'll answer the question about enforcement. So we understand that enforcement's an issue, but we, as I mentioned, we have been working closely with this interagency working group, which includes Department of Buildings and HPD, which are two of our enforcement agencies that enforce, the housing maintenance code and the building code respectively. And they are, coming up with a clear plan about how they will enforce any of these ADU regulations as well as existing regulations. I also just want to note that enforcement issues are often, cropping up today as sort of a consequence of our housing shortage. DOB spends a lot of time enforcing, and HPD spends a lot of time enforcing laws, on properties, for example, where people are crowding into a single family home, where they're overcrowding, where they're living in an illegal unit. All of those things are, consequences of us not having enough housing. So we're hoping that if we address the root cause of this issue by allowing more legal, safe housing, regulated housing, we open up, a more environment in which these units are in the sunlight and they're clearly regulated. We know about them. HPD and DOB can regulate them, rather than right now where people are being forced into the shadows because there aren't legal housing options. But DOB and HPD are working closely on how to improve upon enforcement of in these areas, especially all over the city. But your questions on that were more about low density areas. Small and shared housing, I did want to note these are all of these proposals, including small and shared housing, are permanent housing options. They may be supportive or affordable housing, but they're permanent housing options, not transient shelters or anything like that. This proposal is focused on permanent housing options. Of course, shared housing historically fills an important role in the housing market for people who are new to the city and maybe need an affordable housing option to get their foot in the door. They can't afford maybe a full unit, but that this provides an important housing option for marginally housed folks. I can't say that we don't have like particular shared housing proposals in mind or anything, or particular projects in mind. So I don't have more details to share about that. But this is about filling that role in the housing market by creating shared housing options as they previously used to exist.
Just footnote. Sorry, but this board and a number of us, and then the state, engaged in a very significant study of SRO housing for when there was a time of deinstitutionalization and a number of other things. In fact, I was involved and did the whole study at the time. But the point was to provide housing that would congregate, not with a bathroom within, but with adequate toilet facilities and so on. Over the next 25 years, the last 25 years, that all got out of sync. Nobody wanted it. The real estate agents saw that the market was so terrific that they could just rent apartments for almost anything. There is a sign now, I have observed, as some of you know more about this, of a revival of the advantage of SRO congregate housing for younger people, for people who are alone, for people of limited incomes, and if it would benefit the owner. There are signs of this, and there's actually lobbying going on. So again, we've got so much to do, but there's some great things in the Upper West Side now that we could begin to work on as we're hearing this good proposal.
I appreciate your experience with this. There are a lot of people who disagree, politely disagree that SROs are a good thing.
I'm aware of that.
Yeah. And so I'm supposed to politely say that I'm one of them. And that I am standing, I'm sitting here to represent a lot of homeowners and residents who would like this city of yes to not pass. So I'm officially lodging my opposition to this plan, and I would thank everybody for this.
We have a gentleman who have somebody here waiting patiently. All right, so I
My name is Gregory Gilderman. I've lived up here for 30 years. I live in a former SRO, the cliff dwelling. I would like to give my enthusiastic support for this plan. It's interesting. I think some folks are resistant to change, but the city has pretty drastically changed even in the 30 years that I've been here. You can see the type of people who move in. They're great, but they have a certain level of wealth because of what housing costs. We also lose about 1% of the population of working class and not wealthy people every year. And it's very sad. There was an episode right there with people tears calling about having to go through that. I just listening to the very pointed and detailed questions of this board that we're not hoping for a perfect plan. Does anything happen? I think this one is very good. I think the UAB incentives are really interesting and innovative. And I also think that as much as we talk about affordable housing, to not downplay the increase of supply of market rate as a mechanism for making housing affordable more generally. And this is not a theoretical exercise anymore. You just look at Minneapolis, look at Austin, where rents are now below the rate of inflation because they increased supply, and it's largely been market rate with roughly 20% affordable in the case of Minneapolis. So thank you for your thoroughness, but I really hope you're gonna enthusiastically endorse this very good plan.
Thank you. And just, the board can and frequently does approve proposals with recommendations or subject to specific objections. So there, what you heard tonight is not an indication that we don't approve the plan in general.
Excellent, thank you.
Right. I didn't see, were there any other hands? Okay, yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Eva, I live here in and could you come forward, please? Hi, I'm Caitlin. I'm a CB7 resident of 74th Street, and I'm a former SRO resident. I lived in Webster Apartments on 34th Street for 6 years when I first moved to New York. And I was really excited to see the small street apartment proposals for the city of Yes, because I had a really wonderful experience living in my SRO, and it was as a young person right after my master's moving to the city. It was the only way that I could afford to live in Manhattan, and it was either live in this SRO or live our way. I made a lot of lovely friends and had a wonderful community. So really, I'm in support of city yes in general, but especially the sheriff department.
Thank you very much. Sure.
I'm going to go around her.
If we can hear you, it's fine.
So my name is Phil Levin. I've lived on the Upper West Side for 10 years. 6 of roommates, 4 of them with my wife, and the last year with our son's family. And so I want to strongly support the city of Yes, because the biggest issue facing young families, like my family, is the cost of housing. The median asking rental price, so just a 2-bedroom apartment for a family like mine, $6,500 according to the internet today, which requires families to make $260,000 in income to not be rent burdened, which is crazy. Many of our friends and families are leaving the city, not because they want to. They love the city, they love the playground, our pediatrician is right across the street, you can walk to them, it's amazing. They love raising children here, but because they're being pushed out of the city because there are not enough apartments. So I strongly support the city of Yes, because it will help to add a little more housing to each neighborhood, and I hopefully the Upper West Side, because I also would love to stay in this neighborhood. I think this is a wonderful proposal, so I encourage you to support it.
Thank
you.
Max, other.
We do. We have some online. Why don't we just start with Lisa Orman, then just give me 1 sec to promote her.
I share many of the views of the people who already spoke, but like many of the other, I would say 20s and 30-year-olds who spoke. I grew up on the Upper West Side. I lived there my entire life. And I have the same concerns. Like it really, what keeps me up at night is like looking through Street Easy and just like wondering how I'm gonna be able to afford to live here with also married and like hopefully want to raise here at some point. And I just, right now, I don't think it's possible and I'm going to be forced out. So I just, anything that is like, the problem is not small. We need so much more housing on the Upper West Side, and anything that just starts the process. I want to also echo it, like, doesn't have to be perfect, but just something to get the ball rolling, otherwise, like, we just not gonna be able to. So I think we should. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Max?
Actually, that person declined to be promoted, promoted, but we have Ilan being promoted right now.
Sure. But overall, thank you for the proposal. I think anything that makes it easier to build housing in New York is a good thing. And so while I have concerns about nuances here, I appreciate that the effort is being made. I do have concerns that in isolation, I don't think this is sufficient. We're not doing anything here to support our existing housing stock and to make sure that it continues to be viable. We're also not doing anything as a city to reduce the cost of providing housing. And while I appreciate the comments around 485X, that tackles one very specific sliver of the affordability of those UAP units, rather than the larger picture. So if we want housing, we have to make sure that we fund it and not just making it legal in a zoning way. We have to actually make it possible to build it in a financial way. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone else actually declined to be promoted from online. I'll just do one more call. If anyone else in the attendees section would like to raise your hand. Okay, Adele, I'll promote you, but why don't we go to Sarah Lind first?
Hi, thank you for the folks from DCP for a great presentation, and hello to all my former colleagues on CB7. Great to see you virtually. Just wanted to share my strong support for the proposal. I too have two small kids, been in the neighborhood for 10 years, find rent incredibly burdensome, and would love to be able to have a more affordable place to live in this neighborhood where my kids go to school, and we certainly want to stay as long as we possibly can. And then I just wanted to also add on the SRO point, my mother-in-law lives in an SRO. It's a really, really great housing typology for her. She doesn't have to care for an entire, apartment. She can care for her room and live with others, and she has friends there. So it's not just for, migrants or that, it's for a lot of different typologies and really good for seniors. So anyway, thank you again for your presentation, and definitely urge the board to express full support. Thank you.
Okay, now we can go to, thanks, Sarah. And now we can go to Olive. One more time. Go ahead, Olive. Perhaps not. Then that's it from the online section. Richard, we want to call for hands one more time in person, because there's a couple more people in our spreadsheet that said they're signed up to speak in person. Perhaps they just didn't show.
Yeah. My name is Polly Faye. I'm a member of Community Board 7. And so to me, this conversation about the housing shortage is an old conversation, okay? It's been around for years, where people are saying that you don't have enough housing in New York City because people are constantly going to come to New York City. It's the best city in the world. There's so many social services here. So I feel that this will be an ongoing issue forever. And I do believe that the city council will pass this proposal. So my question is, after the proposal is passed to the city council, how long will it take for this to really move forward in reality? That's what
Let me just probably, if I can follow up on that.
Yeah.
Because this is something that's been percolating in mind. And this is maybe an unfair question, but has city planning done any work to figure out in a ballpark how many new dwelling units will be created by this zoning change?
These are great. Yeah, these are great questions. So to the first question, the housing crisis has been a long time coming. It's been getting worse and worse over decades as we failed to produce enough housing. Zoning is, like a long game that plays out over decades. But the second question sort of answers your first question in a way, in that we have done a full environmental review, which includes unit estimates. And so overall, the environmental review, which makes a series of conservative assumptions about what development under this proposal could be in the next 15 years, estimates an additional 60,000 to over 100,000 units compared to what would be built without the action. And that's a range, of course, and we don't have the crystal ball to know how many will be built, but the environmental review shows that that's what the housing increment could be citywide. Even that, relatively large number citywide translates to a smaller number, when you're only looking at a single neighborhood, because every neighborhood is affected by this proposal. But again, that more information about that is available in the environmental review, the EIS. So happy to provide more detail on that. Thanks.
Thank you.
But my question was, after
This, what's next?
is Albany's gonna vote for this, all right, and that's what I believe. I wanna know, what is the time frame that the city is looking at to launch this proposal?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't realize that you had a more specific question there. So once the city council adopts this, if they adopt it, hopefully by the end of the year, that's the timeline we're talking about, it becomes the as of right zoning once city council adopts it. So at that point, people can use these rules to build the housing as of right at any point. That development will play out over a period of decades. That's why I said the environmental review looks 15 years into the future, but the zoning will change as soon as it's adopted by city council. And this is providing an as of right zoning framework, which means if someone is using, for example, universal affordability preference, they won't have to then seek an additional action to use that. They'll be able to use the zoning as of right that'll be on the books if and when this proposal is adopted. Sorry, I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Great.
So I have two more questions, one of which is an immediate follow-up on what you were just talking about. Just your environmental review or your projections about 15-year build out under this proposal, if adopted, make any projections as to how many affordable units would be built within the CB7 district in that time frame?
I'll have to get back to you about the geographically specific projections and what we can share there from the EIS. It is available on the zoning application portal. I apologize for not having those numbers top of mind, but we can definitely get back with more information on the CD7 specific projections in a follow-up meeting. We can dive into those more, or email.
My second is confusing to me, so it's probably going to confuse you as well, but I'll do my best to put it into a question. Certainly, to my observation anyway, we have had basically almost no affordable housing built under current incentives and zoning regulations as they are in our district. And to my observation, which may not be entirely accurate, the vast majority of housing that has been built is condominiums with some rentals, expensive rentals, all market rate rentals. So the question I have is, with the mandatory, with the optional bonuses, the 20% bonuses or whatever they all are, if you include affordable housing in buildings, how do you mix condominiums with rentals? That is, can you get your 20% bonus if you have rental apartments that are the affordables, which is more typical, although there is such a thing as purchasable affordables, in the buildings that are typically being built in our district, which are condominiums. Is that clear enough as the question?
Yeah, I think I understand the question, and thanks so much for asking it. So zoning does not regulate ownership or rental directly. It can't regulate tenure directly. And I will say it's extremely unusual, I would say, in developments to mix. It's not unheard of, but to mix like condos and rental units in the same building. But universal affordability preference does apply to both rental and homeownership options. So if someone pursues homeownership or pursues rental, they would be able to use universal affordability preference if they're permanently affordable units in the additional FAR. I think a key point here is that the envelope, the heights in some of the districts will provide the space for you to actually build that affordable housing. And so people will actually be able to realize maybe a rental building with affordable housing in a way that they weren't before. And they'll get the additional 400 as well. Yeah.
The last sentence, please, you just said that the heights in the districts would vary enough or be conducive to affordable housing. Not sure that I understood that, and if I haven't, if you in this great big study have done some studies and provided data to at least bolster that point. More height, more higher buildings will be conducive to, in the longer run, providing a variety of housing, including affordable. Not sure about that, but that's what I.
No, yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to suggest that height necessarily, is a cause and effect to affordability. What I was trying to say was that some districts today have extremely restrictive envelopes, very low height limits. And so people cannot realistically, build a building, much less one that includes, affordable housing. As part of UAP, we're revising these envelopes so that, we're giving people the optional 20% bump, but we're not just giving them that optional, bump and telling them fit it in your existing envelope. We're also providing additional height so that they can actually realize it. That's all I was saying, is that we're making sure we provide sufficiently flexible envelopes so that people can actually build the affordable housing that UAP would allow them.
Just to respond a little bit to affordable senior housing, and a little correction, 300 units were built on 108th Street. I was involved in the planning of that. As I'm biased as president of the Westside Federation towards the senior part of this, we have on 108th Street on the other corner, closer to Columbus, another 85 units going up. On 85th Street, what was the Brandon, is going to be totally affordable senior supportive housing. And the Independence House, which was in Michelama, was supposed to go market rate. We've taken it over and not through Michelama guaranteed supportive senior housing forever, for the life of the building.
Thank you, Sheldon. We've been a lot more successful with senior housing than we have with.
True.
Can I add on to Ethel's question? Just can you make sure I have this right? Like, how will UAP be more successful than voluntary inclusionary housing? Is it just that it gives that flexibility in the envelopes and heights of the building, or are there other aspects of the policy that will make it produce more affordable housing in districts like ours than voluntary inclusionary housing? Because I think we've seen limited results recently, at least with voluntary inclusionary housing.
Yeah, so voluntary inclusionary housing, I think the biggest difference between voluntary inclusionary housing and UAP is that voluntary inclusionary housing has, relatively limited applicability in only certain areas. Does VIH apply? UAP extends, sort of inclusionary-like framework citywide. It also makes updates to the AMI, to a lower AMI, and allows for income averaging to improve upon VIH. So those are the key differences between UAP and VIH, and how we think UAP will produce, much more affordable housing, both more deeply affordable, but also more in terms of quantity than VIH ever could.
Can you explain how income averaging would work?
Yeah, this is a great question. So income averaging right now through VIH, if you want to meet your affordability requirement, 80% AMI, you have to provide all of those units at 80% AMI. That doesn't provide the range of incomes that New Yorkers need, especially as AMIs have risen dramatically over recent years. Through income averaging, you would be allowed to meet the affordability requirement by including units at up to 3 AMI bands. The maximum AMI for averaging would be 100% AMI, but you would have to meet the 60% requirement through averaging. So for example, you could use 30% AMI units, 60% AMI units, and 90% AMI units in equal measure to arrive at 60% average. Whereas today, in voluntary inclusionary housing, you're just providing 80% AMI units. So that's the basic explanation of averaging.
Sounded like the tenant with averaging.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah, very different.
I have a quick question. Okay, I'll get those. Yeah.
I want to go back. Did I understand that because it is extremely unlikely that a condo would also have a rental component that basically, when we are talking about the 20% bump, we are only talking about rental apartments?
No, it could also be, sorry, I just meant to say in response to the specific question that was asked, which, and apologies if I misunderstood. I think they were asking about mixing condos and rental units. Like if you had condo in your 100%, you had condo in your market rate floor area and then rental in your bump. And I just said that's, a pretty uncommon type of development. It's not impossible, but most buildings are a single type of tenure throughout. But UAP does work with home ownership. If you can use, you can create home ownership, affordable condos, co-ops with UAP FARs. And we also, as Chelsea mentioned in the presentation through MIH, are making some improvements to satisfying MIH through home ownership. So we're definitely hoping that this does produce some affordable home ownership opportunities through both UAP and MIH improvements.
Okay, but doesn't a home ownership opportunity mean that people at the lower end of AMI are just cut out of this?
No, it doesn't. Leave it to HPD to come up with a term sheet for it.
They will?
Yeah. I won't say whether they will
Okay.
or they won't, but they can.
Because just going with the fact that basically this has become an area of conduct.
But I did a project years ago where we had townhouses in East New York, 30 of them were market and were targeted at NYCHA residents. And the NYCHA was 2-family, so they would get a rental unit and family unit, and then the markets were 3 families.
Interesting.
Didn't get built, but that's only the session.
I was receptive in that very interesting neighborhood, that they were receptive to that. It's a different set of dynamics.
Right, but it's possible to do whether
Yes.
it happens here or not, another issue.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I will note that just to respond to that comment, that many of our proposals we didn't focus on today in the missing middle proposals in the low density areas, we think work very well with HPD term sheets to provide affordable homeownership. So I'm not saying that's the only, there are pathways for affordable homeownership in high density areas too, but that is one opportunity I just wanted to highlight for affordable homeownership when we're looking citywide. And someone brought up that great example in Brooklyn.
Can I get back to a question somebody else asked? What is the difference and what are the relative advantages and disadvantages of inclusionary, voluntary inclusionary housing and what you're proposing here? Just thinking about it off the top of my head, if I were a developer, I think I would prefer voluntary inclusionary housing because A, you can do it off-site. B, it's not 100% additional FAR because you have to build affordable. It's some fraction of that. And I understand it's not available in all areas, but where it is available isn't, from a developer's point of view, isn't voluntary inclusionary housing preferable. I think, and you're getting more than we would otherwise, but from the developer's perspective, what is there an additional incentive or less of an incentive under your proposal?
Yeah, I think I'm going to get back to you with more details about the current obstacles to using VIH. I think other people will be better suited to speak to that. So I'll take that question down and get back to you.
All right, so we have 3 things that you're going to get back to us on. One is follow up on whether you have localized predictions for the number of individual units. The other is this issue of comparing voluntary inclusionary housing with the UAP proposal. And to be honest, I've gotten
Sliver law. Sliver law, yeah, we've got them all. We've got the taken detailed notes. So
we have one more comment.
I think you started to speak to it. So on the changes from VIH, so I'm seeing one, if I'm understanding correctly, currently it applies in only the green areas on the map. And
UAP is going to apply in all of the blue areas as well as the green areas. Is that correct understanding?
No, sorry. So voluntary inclusionary housing, that's like the R10 IH program, which is the voluntary inclusionary housing program, applies in the blue areas. Voluntary inclusionary housing also applies in inclusionary housing designated areas, which are shown in green. Chelsea can maybe show the orange map, which shows where universal affordability preference would apply, which is all R6 to R10 districts citywide.
Okay. So the follow-up question, which is I think what you started to speak to, is that the blue area actually is fairly prominent around here. There's a fair amount of blue. And one of the comments was that we don't see a lot of uptake of VIH. And so then the follow-up was, are we going to expect to see anyone uptaking with UAP, or is it going to be limited?
Yeah, that's the question.
Because
I just finish your question. I think I didn't want to cut you off. Was there more?
Well, the second and third bullet, the third one is maybe more mixed, but the second one seems to indicate that if anything, if the overall AMI requirement is getting stricter, we might expect actually that to restrict developer interest. That's potentially mitigated by the.
Right. Yeah. So I think we get back to this in some detail on that analysis.
Yeah, I want to get back to you with more detail specifically on why in the VIH areas, what uptake there has been in those areas, what developments have been there, and what the obstacles have been. So we can definitely get you more localized analysis about your existing VIH areas.
First thing we want are unintended consequences.
It's up to us to contribute to that.
Well, we intend on
Okay, let's go. It's warm.
Last
thing is that it may be a good idea to drag up the former projects that we looked at, because we plan them, we okay them, and then we don't follow through. And I'm curious to see how well the lower income projects, I think there are only 3, Shelley? 3 of the types of projects that would fit these criteria. There's one, I can't remember, but I'd love to see the spreadsheet, or if we have someone, just call and say, how you doing? Did we get it right? Because 2 of them were quite expensive to build. But I think those 2 were the most successful, weren't they? Which 2 were? Which 2? I can't, they were on, where were they? 108th Street?
108th Street was Wisfish at 108th Street.
Right.
And they were really.
And then the one on
really 3
97.
buildings there in one. Right.
I'd like to see how that compares to where we are today, because I think we never had the influx or the demand that we're facing.
And that was senior housing, family housing, and the transitional delta in the same building.
Let's get the process now.
Yeah, that's okay.
Ethel's proposal is that we.
Can we let city planning go?
Any further questions for Veronica or for Chelsea?
I think we'd like to know how soon they can get answers.
None online.
Yeah. Hello?
So the question was how soon we can get answers to the follow-up questions? Yeah, we'll get those to you.
What we're setting up
And,
here.
and we all want to thank you.
Yeah,
Very
thank
much.
you.
Thank you for allowing us to present tonight. Veronica, some of these questions I think we can probably get back to the board with by the end of the week. It's possible that some of them might take a little longer. I don't know if you like the VIH uptakes, like current obstacles to VIH, and then the what sites the campus infill proposals might apply to. That might take a little longer, but I would expect probably within the next 2 weeks. Does that sound?
That's great. Very worthwhile. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Terrific.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Goodbye.
Thank you.
You're welcome to eavesdrop. Or then we go home and have dinner. Which should I choose?
It's hot as hell in here. Let's.
All right, so let's, if we can, and thanks so much. Really, it was very
Very
informative. We appreciated your answers to our questions. And we appreciate the obvious, Herculean effort that city planning has put into this.
Thank
Whether
you.
we approve it or not, that's it.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you all for all the time you're taking to consider the proposal, but I'll let you all get on with the rest of your meeting.
Thank you. Ethel. As I understand, you want to divide up this proposal into units and have small groups address.
Not making a big deal, but something that is workable and that people can do. I mean, I can already think, and maybe 3 or 4 people should get here to simply to say, okay, what are the major concerns that we have and that we need information on, and what are maybe some of the recommendations? And then perhaps, I mean, this is a great group, there's a couple of people out there, and set up, I don't know, maybe 3 committees over the next 4 weeks of 3 or 4 people to begin, or something like that.
We don't have.
Well, I know we don't have that luxury.
You know, June board meeting is a drop dead, because otherwise Beverly can't vote as borough.
Yeah, but that may or may not continue to occur, but what we have is the rest of May, tough, Memorial Day, whatever, and we have 1 month. And so we have to do some subdivisions, some organizing of our most important concerns. Then we don't know yet whether there won't be more going on in July, or whether the city council will be voting on all of, that it will be.
We have to assume they will. We have to assume.
And so we have to learn about it.
The city planning commission is voting.
We're on a clock here.
In July.
We need to organize our process.
Exactly. Yes, let's go.
So look, what I think I'd like to do to start
Indeed.
is to go around as we usually do and get people's views of what they like, what they don't like, if there's anything that troubles them. And then if there are clusters of people with the same type of objection, forms kind of subcommittees, but this must be done quickly. This is not, we don't have. We have to, what I suspect will happen, should happen, is that once we get everybody's views on this, I'll try to draft the resolution, and I expect that everybody will have input into the draft, and all of this has to be done by when's the June meeting?
June 4th.
June 4th. Right, so, and there's Memorial Day in between. So let's do it. Let's start.
My concern is the implications for the district, the special interest district.
Very much.
Okay. And more specifically,
we heard about height, no height, preferred low height limits. It's very vague. It's not clear enough what we have now, how that will change. And because we're going to have to go into that discussion later on, so we better get it right now.
Well,
okay.
Really concerned about that. I didn't quite follow.
That might be a question worth asking city planning.
Well, we did, and
No, but I mean, to come back to us with, hey.
well, all right, let's
our
legal readers people have share that concern.
Yeah.
Okay, Shelley, why don't you coordinate with Seema?
Okay, the 3 of us, we are the second.
And Louisa.
That's fine.
Okay, and let's do it in the next.
Oh,
yeah.
Before Travis.
Yeah. Well, that would be less than 48 hours.
Exactly, that's my point.
Okay. Louisa.
Oh, I said sliver, but also UDP versus inclusionary housing.
Yeah, I think
That's a concern of mine, and I think we need
I have
a fine tuning to make sure it actually induces development in our district, but that's gonna be dependent on the.
Yeah,
DEP response.
take care of the project,
Yeah.
plugging it in and see what happens.
Why don't you be captain?
I'm glad to do that.
Okay, and the issue is what we asked at the very end, which is, are we creating a further disincentive? All right, Paige.
I have no idea.
You're in charge of that.
I figured we're mentioning, well, yeah, I haven't got, the compact version in about how to include landmarks, within some of the, because I know they're gonna change. You know, they're gonna end up being, low-rise buildings at the bases of things is what I'm thinking, or, removing, green space for other buildings, because we're running out of construction space, to be honest, you know, for schools and things.
What do you think of the expansion though, of TDR? I thought that was good.
I do, but I don't know enough about it.
It's both good and scary.
Yeah.
It allows landmarks to survive.
That's
But the trade-off is that there's a larger area for the air rights. Yeah,
Exactly.
and so that's an issue.
And that
you know.
will completely obliterate any good efforts done at the low spectrum. Because all of a sudden we're gonna have shadows, people are gonna be, and we can't always afford affordable housing. Because to go high costs more than doing something more modest as low rise. And we haven't done really good low rise in a long time.
That's right. That's true. That's
So,
probably right.
yeah,
So
I'm happy to bring it for the committee to look and see how many.
Hey, why don't you, you're the landmarks mate. Okay, but why don't you look at proposal, I mean, it's on, we have the proposal online, I think everybody has.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, look at from that perspective,
Okay,
get back to me with your comments,
all right.
and we'll try to, deal with that.
I can also add to that task, if possible, to in that study, choose 3 or 4 examples of what could occur by extending.
No, exactly.
That, but to do that, not to be abstract about it. For example, we all know that landmarks can sell their air rights across the street, but then there are other possibilities here of moving further afield or in the neighborhood, you know, like the theater district. So I would like to make it specific.
You still need to land somewhere, and most of the places you're gonna land are landmarks as well.
So, okay.
Except in certain places, like on Broadway, still has.
But just what you're saying is a good thing to work on it briefly for our district and show some of the examples. I think so that we can understand.
Another concern, which is not so much preservation as Paige is thinking of it in terms of landmarks, but there's preservation of existing tenements and the like.
Exactly.
When we lose the inclusionary housing preservation option, that mechanism is.
So why don't this do so? That.
And that is, particularly around, 90, from 95th Street to, whatever, 20 blocks later, we have a lot of open space that's used for parking, and playgrounds that bump up against schools. And I'm always afraid that one day they're gonna disappear because they're gonna say we can't afford it. So somehow, and this is just a wheel going around in my head right now, but somehow we need to look at open space, what we need, and we know we don't have enough because the kids need running around time and a nanny or an elderly person sitting in the sun. We don't want to forfeit that. So where does the new development that we need come from? And in the past, Shelley and I know
that they always try to rate the existing, cherry picking the best.
Right.
So I don't know. So I'm happy to pull together some facts and see where it lands, but I can't guarantee magic.
Yeah, but you just tried two different things.
I know.
One, doing away with parking spaces or for what, or preserving one. Two, and maintaining, enhancing, and even expanding open space. These are two different things. They may be related, but they're very, very different. So let's.
Organize that, right?
Well, the only thing I think of is just to put it in perspective for the parking issue.
Right.
We don't like cars, but we have come to the aid of people who have refurbished old garages so people can park in them.
But but there's also it's constantly stated here that the Upper West Side should promote residential parking permits, which other places have. Let's not.
Having an in-depth discussion.
No, but who can I?
But it's helpful because they got enthusiastic.
Ethel? Ira, you want to get involved in that? No, I want to, whatever, I'm being volunteer for, okay.
Couple of the people.
Okay, yeah.
And I think city planning's campus information will be helpful on
Yes, they do have that.
Okay.
And there's big studies about the residential parking.
Okay.
Did we get a copy of the DCP slides?
They said we would. Max has them. Max?
I'm here. What was the question?
The slide deck.
Yes.
I don't think I got it.
Can we see it?
But can you send it to everybody?
Yeah, of course, no problem.
Do we have access to the EIS that they?
Well, all the materials are on the website. That's correct, but we can send the slides around.
EIS is in general the work was, this is probably more work.
There's a move to reduce the EIS.
That's also.
It will have, between 15 years, or if nothing is done, I'm sorry, I'm getting very tired.
It's too hot.
No, it's.
All right, let's get additional issues. Beverly, are you?
Okay, I'm not trying to ruin the committee, but I have an issue.
Okay.
I was confused and also concerned about the campus piece as it applies to night shift.
Right.
And figuring out how to take advantage of relatively low rise or other options for adding smaller type apartments for seniors or some other aspect to actually, right now, nature constitutes a huge proportion of our low income houses.
Exactly.
And just trying to understand how, without doing horrible damage to some of those campuses.
Well, there are still other things, campuses. Well,
I know.
No, but Beverly's
and
point,
not like shit.
Yeah.
listen,
Okay.
Beverly's point is critical. I must say it was the first one I raised about nature. And I thought about that, and I think we do have a lot, and we should give it an important priority of understanding and perhaps advocacy.
Right now, with respect to all of these subdivisions, we all have their proposal. I mean, it's 1,000 pages, but the relevant pages are probably from page 10 to, if we want to eliminate low income, it's probably 20 pages. Starting with page 10, and so, yeah, not the text, this is the description.
Okay.
The text.
The one
again,
is like, yeah, 100 pages. Yeah, the one that's 44 pages.
Yeah.
It's again.
Okay.
Can go to the text, go out and look at the special district.
We could try it, yeah.
because, it's an annotated text and Lincoln Square is a finite portion.
Yeah, okay.
They're doing their own.
If that's, I'm not sure organized by district or it's just a general rule of this whole special district.
There is a section on.
Is there?
Yeah,
All right,
and the thing is that unless there is a special rule for Lincoln Square, it then falls back on the generic rule.
Right.
Right.
And that
For
usually.
the height, for whatever.
Yeah.
But Lincoln Square has some very, very specific rules. It was the first special district.
Yeah.
So that might make it a little odd.
and a lot of
The other thing is I was thinking about this when I was reading through all 1,012. Well, there are no maps here. So where is 1112?
I meant to add it.
Well, once they
11 and 12 is on there. Oh, no, they're people for future rezonings.
Right, I know, but they created it with something in mind.
Are there any?
They didn't do it, they just wanted to.
I remember,
You're right.
some of the popular stuff, a lot of those.
Text that go.
Well, it's conversions in Midtown,
What she's
which
doing,
would be
what they're doing
where they need the
is
extra.
creating a
In order to make the
category.
Doesn't mean R's gonna try to do a
R11, R11,
And then.
but they are not remapping. Right. They're not gonna remap until they identify a site that is appropriate.
I
can't
can't
My-
tell you how.
And then there'll be a ULIP.
My fear is that the only identifiable site in our district is the ABC site.
That's exactly right.
But didn't,
Yeah, so I think that's a valid issue. I don't think, I think that they should, that if they're gonna have to come back to us with a remapping anyway. Why not at that time deal with whether there should be an R11?
That's the right framework.
Yeah.
Yeah, Richard, the other site that's large is what's included in the Morningside Heights for the renewal project,
Oh, right.
right?
Well, this is something we must begin to monitor again, because they stopped it for a while, but it is going to happen.
And I saw it showing Abreu on
Right.
the street. He says, I'd like to talk to you about that. I said, anything happening?
Yeah.
It's going to.
Let's table this for.
Is that?
That is a site where these other
Yeah.
options.
It needs a special district.
No, it's not. It's not.
They're gonna take out,
Oh,
take out.
about the Broadway.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
You remember
18.
I don't think Sheffer, what Beverly had to say about public housing, there are various portfolios. We have Douglas Western Broadway, right, as you know, on the corner building. And so I work with you on that because I would like to know what the impact would be for the various night shows.
Beverly, can I ask you and Ollie to follow up on that?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and I know.
Melissa.
Well, all right, but just, really the issue is understanding what you're saying.
Exactly.
And then figuring out
We
whether
can
we
figure
like
it
it.
out.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right, so
Yeah.
any other
I just want to introduce myself. My name is Adam.
Okay.
I work as a historic preservationist and urban planner, so happy to provide my guidance on the TDR stuff. As someone who does this for a living, like I've gone through the 1,500 page annotated text to try to understand what it means. And broadly, like I'm really think this is exciting. The one thing I just wanted to say about UAP that I think maybe DCP didn't do a great job clarifying is that the big difference between UAP and VIH is that it applies to much more zoning districts.
Exactly.
So VIH is, yeah, so that's like one of the other things is that it's gonna have so many more sites in our neighborhood where it could apply, whereas before it was only really in like the highest density areas. So that's just gonna mean that any development we get, the UAP is gonna seem like a no-brainer in a way that it hasn't before.
Most of our community board area, at least not the R6 like Fox, but most of the area that's R10, it does apply.
Well, the VIH applied, but now UAP will apply in a lower density.
And it's going to have an impact on our rezoning that we did. Because we tried to keep the zoning down above 97th Street to preserve what was there. And we fought the city on it.
And it was a huge triumph to rezone 96 to 110th Street and not make it a mirror image of the high Lincoln Square.
We're talking about something that hasn't happened.
Yeah.
Well, very soon.
Maybe, but look, I mean, to me, if
online.
It's obviously, if we're going to increase housing, affordable housing, it's going to be a trade-off. Can't avoid it. And the trade-off here is 20% more FAR for 20% more affordable housing, which is a better deal for the community than the inclusionary housing. And if a developer doesn't want to do that deal, they're not going to do the deal. If they want to do it, they're going to do it, but it doesn't, I don't believe will increase the ability of the developer to build up bigger. It will simply increase the reward to the community.
Maybe. Do you have a? Are you?
I'll introduce myself as well. I'm Egor. I'm another new member. I don't have such impeccable land use credentials. I took a land use law class last semester, so that's the extent.
Well, you're ahead of all of us.
I know what some of these terms mean. Right. No particular contribution. It does seem exciting. The single SROs, right? The mixed use ones. I know some of my friends who probably want to live in some of those units.
Yes.
The idea of living closer to some of your peers is exciting to folks. But yeah, no,
It's be good.
You know, I once taught a land use law class over one of the Brooklyn schools. And what I did was to give examples of FAR and zoning and massing. I brought a Lego set.
And one of the interesting things about the SRO units is in the Fetner building, there's some that are affordable, there's some that are.
Yeah,
large.
exactly.
So it would be good to find out what we'll call them compact.
I could.
I call them compact.
But this thing does, the best thing about this, you know, the Fetner building, the affordability was a term of art.
Right, it was like 130.
If you had a family of four and you earned $140,000 a year, you qualify. And we could not convince HPD to lower that. This will do that. And that's a major thing.
What do you say?
Yeah, see,
I'm still a little bit concerned about the receiving sites for the TDR expansion and what that means for potentially, I mean, it's Paige's point originally about potentially getting rid of a lot of affordable units for potentially just market rate housing and what that means. So I feel like looking at an example or two of what that means in our district would be helpful.
Right now, we have a block between 87th and 88th on Amsterdam, Columbus, and they're all empty.
That's Amsterdam, yeah.
Yeah, Amsterdam.
The example
We have the same thing, right, northeast corner,
Right.
6th Street.
And I cannot find anything to describe what it is.
So the example I'm
But
thinking
now, that's another one
Those-
where
I used to work at Lincoln Center.
one thing we could recommend, I'm not saying we should, could recommend, that if there's gonna be an enlargement of the rights transfers, that the receiving site be mandatory inclusionary housing.
That's interesting. Is there a mechanism for that?
There will be.
But they're getting rid of it. They're getting rid of it inclusionary.
No,
Mandatory, am I?
All right, look, we're hurrying, then let's wrap up and get.
Miranda wrote that with Ira and Melissa, but I would want to add something once they cover the circle. So a couple things, at first I was, very negative feeling about the shared housing, business. Having maybe because of, as happened for the last few decades where that
SROs became a bad thing and were being eliminated. But I must say, I was rather persuaded by the many people who spoke in favor of that, so I pride myself on that. And two more things though, with regard to the transfer development rights, I see that as very scary, and I don't know if anybody else heard what I thought she said, but didn't see, one of them said it didn't see in the slide, which was that not only would individual landmarks be able to now spread their development rights all around, but also, I thought what she said, one of them said, was historic district. That is, you're just some old brownstone, and as we know, all the brownstones are slightly underbuilt.
Did you say that?
I know.
This wasn't allowed in a historic district, but now it would be.
It's still subject to,
review.
yeah, to review.
Well,
And you still need a place to
that,
land.
in any event, we could find it all very,
You can clarify that?
the idea that you can, whether you have another, you know, two units worth of extra unused floor area, or whether you've got a whole lot more of your church and you're 50 feet tall and whatever. The idea that you can spread that around the whole neighborhood, I think.
One thing we could do, one thing we could recommend, you know, in addition to making it mandatory, is to make it subject to special permit. So that it's not as if like, you don't need to, you don't like it?
I hope she loves them.
Me too. Me too.
We actually have a project like this already, where they are putting, 2 apartments on the top of a, was it 5-story, townhouse somewhere in the 80s.
Not familiar with that one.
But it's happening, without, because it's all suppressed in the back, and then they're building it out. We've had at least 2 of these, and we didn't take the hint that this is going to be not only broad, but they're going up.
Well, we get that all the time with penthouse additions on.
Yeah, correct.
One more comment, if I could, and that is that while in general, I think that a lot of this for the lower density areas makes a lot of sense. The more I've listened, the more it seems to me that in our district, we're not going to get any more affordable housing out of this. You know, trying to put together what are going to be the incentives for a developer to add all of the disadvantages, the building costs of, hey, you've got now these less moneyed people, you're mixing in your building and all the costs of maintaining a larger building, et cetera. My sense is in our district, given the history we've had for the last 20, 30 years of what gets built as luxury condominiums, and even notwithstanding the various incentives that have been in place, that it's going to be good.
Well, yeah, here's my take on that.
Yeah.
I thought about that. We are residents of New York City. And I think we all have a shared interest in increasing the availability of housing, particularly affordable housing in New York City. And so what we should be focusing on is not whether we're going to benefit greatly, but whether there are detriments that will affect community board 7. And if there aren't, then we should approve this as something that will increase housing in New York City.
Right, so let us set up a schedule of our neighbors here. Spoke so eloquently, we're talking about wanting to be able to stay and afford in our neighborhood.
I just understand I agree. What they really should be advocating for is expanding rent control.
Well, that's going to be.
But that's not.
That's also.
We gotta do that before June.
Okay, let's set a schedule for the different subcommittees to.
I do think this policy has some effect in that the city-owned sites, like Respicious site, can now do 20% more than they could previously, so that.
We rezoned that.
No, it had already been rezoned.
Okay.
And there was the garages.
Anyhow,
Let's get to schedule.
we have to have a published resolution by June 4th.
Actually, you've got to have it 72 hours before June 4th.
That's like tomorrow.
Be grateful if we have it.
You don't have to be so literal. You call them up and say, we're coming in at the other time.
If we have it 72 hours in advance, that runs the risk that board members will read.
Right.
Yes, we want to avoid that at all. So,
Middle of the memorial.
We'll try to wrap this up in one minute. All right, so here's what, unfortunately, my week, next week in the evening, I've got something going on.
But we don't need you.
No, we need, I think, we need as a committee, full committee, via Zoom sometime next week.
Right.
Right, and what I'd like to propose.
Richard, before you jump into process, I've had my hand up for a bit, and since I'm here on the Zoom, I'd like to say my piece about the city of Yes in less than a minute. I just want to say that I heard with great empathy the pleas of our community members who stood up to say that they cannot afford to live here, that they are rent burdened. Many of them grew up in this neighborhood and feel they cannot stay in this neighborhood, even though they want to raise their children here. Their children go to school here. One is a former member of this community board. And I think it's not just about in my humble opinion, this is my opinion. It's not just about will it do harm to our community. I think it is also incumbent upon us to think about the up and comers who are trying to stay here, our neighbors who feel they cannot afford to live here. And I didn't teach land use law, but I took it once upon a time. And I think the only way to get affordable housing is to increase the housing stock. And I believe that in order for us, I said less than a minute, I think I probably have about 10 seconds. I think that in order for us to create affordable housing, and I'm focused on our district, but it is the city, we're all going to have to give a little something. Every corner of the district is going to have to give so that we can all enjoy a more affordable city. And I'm thinking in terms of affordable housing. And I really heard those people who stood up to say, I want to stay, I want to be your neighbor. Please help this be a neighborhood that works for me. So I'm right as of now in support of this proposal, even though I think it could be, there could be more clarity, and I think it could go further. That's where I stand. Thank you for hearing me.
The general proposition, without getting into the weeds, is there anyone who disagrees with Jami?
It's the doing of it, and I figured it out.
But I think we have a consensus that as a general proposition, this is a good thing, not only for the city, but possibly and hopefully for our community. And now we have to, I think, go into the details and see if there are any suggestions we can make to improve it, or any objections we have to any specific portions of it.
Okay, let's go.
So we can pick a date. I'd like to start I'd like to have a Zoom call at 5 o'clock one evening next week.
But I ask you though, in that I appreciate we have to do that, but maybe since there are different groups of 3 or 4 who express the interest and want to do it, can it be possible for each one of those groups within their schedules
first to meet and get what they want to say, and then we'll get it to the, okay?
Yeah, that's my, when
So
we
that's
meet via Zoom, we're gonna go through each group. Get the input from that group, and we're going to try to get a consensus on an overall resolution.
Okay, how about research next week and that we meet by Zoom the week of the 27th?
Well,
Which is the
27th
28th. And now I
28th.
see.
We can do that. We're having a
No, no,
meeting.
but we need to have
have
it
a major
posted by
meeting,
Friday.
HHS
Friday
meeting
the 21st.
Up in the Manhattan Valley,
What time?
from 7 o'clock to.
So if
On
we
what
did
day?
it at 5 o'clock.
28.
Yeah.
Shelley, if we did it at 5 o'clock, would that be okay?
It's okay with me.
29.
But isn't it necessary
leaves it
for
really late.
the subgroups who are
But we
expressing
would
interest
do that the week
that they
before.
should talk with each
And
other
we
and then
will,
come
we
together?
will do that the week
Exactly what I mean. We have,
On the 27th.
so the 28th, well, 27th, I'm going to a 90th birthday party. I can't not go to that.
20.
To meet on-
And the week before, because I'm just concerned about how late that leaves our ability to reach consensus and develop a document.
Right. We could do it Friday.
The 24th?
Yeah, but
I
we
don't
have
know,
to
it's
do it
Memorial Day weekend. You guys look.
Travis is late, but I'll have to be in synagogue.
Beginning of Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah.
Okay,
So if we did it at 5, would that be okay?
I can do it.
What day of the week?
Depends on how long.
The 23rd for the weekend.
I can't do, Monday through Thursday. Oh, no, this is the whole committee.
Okay, but we have to do some subcommittees, because they're not.
You're gonna release that yourselves.
No, we don't.
Can I just pause for 1 second?
Sure.
I know this is putting something on you. It sounded like you had volunteered to draft the resolution ultimately. Based on my notes, it sounds like at least half of the proposals that DCP presented tonight do not apply in our district if we don't have a problem. So
Correct.
at least that part of the resolution could get drafted whenever.
Okay.
So we're only dealing with, it sounds like.
Well, there's an issue with that.
Sure.
And the issue is, do we butt into some other district's issue? Or conversely, do
No,
we say because at least affordable housing in the city? And I'm inclined to the latter.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree.
I mean, my concern, as I said, on one of the sessions that for people throughout the city, and it was hyper focused on parking in Brooklyn,
Exactly.
Queens,
Right.
and
Ridiculous.
Bronx. And that was the only thing they were concerned
No,
about.
they're concerned about those units.
Well, it's also the cost of congestion pricing now going up. Because
Yeah, but somebody's not gonna take a subway. from
Well, let's not talk
Rochester
about
to
that.
the-
That's the difference of it. In 5 o'clock Friday, subcommittees have time,
Friday, the
Next.
4th.
the 24th.
Okay, may I suggest, to the extent people have time or whatever, that some of the groups or shared even meet with each other before, because we could then become more coherent when we see it.
On the 24th, I'm gonna call on each group to report what their findings are and what their
Right.
recommendations are. And then we're going to see if everybody agrees, and then we're going to have the outline of the resolution, which I'll try to draft before, during the week of the 27th. And if Beverly's lucky, we'll have a resolution by the end of that week.
But all I'm saying, it's just one slight thing. Of course, we're gonna do 5 o'clock, but some of the subgroups might want to talk to each other in order to be coherent.
No.
Okay.
At our,
We have to, yeah, because I've already picked on our new member
We have a
here.
week to
I
put it
didn't want to
together.
take both of you, but I'm quite happy. And you and I putting it together before, easy. And we know the streets where they're problematic.
Actually, this is the whole that scares me.
What is it wrapping?
89 to 96.
all right, look,
Columbus, Amsterdam.
it's, unless there's any other business. Louisa wanted a report on the ABC Center.
Yeah.
So I'll give it a very quick. I see. I think the last time I reported, we'd had one meeting with Gary, at which I concluded that we had to have another meeting with George James present. We had that meeting. And the upshot of the meeting was everybody wanted to compromise, and George said he had some ideas. He did not disagree with Gary's basic premise, which is that and as of right, a development that was required to be compliant with Lincoln Square would create more shadows in a smaller area as opposed to a big tall building that would create longer shadows in the smaller area.
And for a smaller period of time.
And yeah, and you know, Gary's obviously really wants a tall building, but he's indicated that he's willing to compromise on the height and also to add add affordable housing. We did not get into the details because I wanted and Beverly wanted George to come up with a new proposal that might be attractive, or if not attractive, at least.
So I take it that you would now have the money for George to do the work.
We now, Gail volunteered to fund George's work, which has been done.
But are there maps? Are there things that we can look at it?
Look, there is very useful problem, which is that there are models. I can try to get Gary to share them with the committee, but our meetings are public. So
He'll be reluctant to do that.
he'd be very reluctant to do that.
Well, I understand that.
Maybe I could take it.
But before they put models, there had to be some kind of maps, some kind of, computer drawings.
He's got all that.
Please, none of the little models, which were very helpful in understanding his original proposal, are where this is going. It's going somewhere else that we just don't know where yet.
And where is it go? Where
We
is it?
don't know yet.
So
George is working.
George is gonna come up with.
Well, that's why now that you have about money, it's the fund for the city or whatever to pay him. I mean, so what if he has models? It isn't clear yet in any way, shape or form, and the communication has not been there, and none of us have seen it.
We communicated everything to you that we have learned.
Okay, so it's not.
And I'm willing to do it on a daily basis. If you wanna call me at 8 o'clock in the morning every day, I'll tell you that nothing's happened. Right?
Nicole, you're gonna do it, you're gonna send it.
Yes, we mentioned the hotel at the earlier meeting. There's a hotel that doesn't seem to be objectionable in terms of. In terms of mass or height.
Thing is, we haven't seen anything.
I can't help you. I think, you know, if you haven't seen the sheriff, it's more than happy. We're not gonna reach any agreement because the entire committee needs everything.
It is not also the case.
Take care of the rest.
Buildings on the block have made agreements, tentative agreements to sell their rights.
They made.
Let's go.
Gary. Run. Are like regulating this.
Like in the old days, when you kind of lawyer.
Yeah. I think.
We don't have to. Thank you very much. Yeah. You guys, welcome.